Hello, good morning from Asia, good evening, good afternoon, and good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the China Insiders Are on Live program. We connect with China insiders from around the world to hear their views and opinions on issues making headlines. My name is Chen. I'm the co-producer of I'm in China channel. We're an independent studio based in Beijing, China, and mainly produce cultural videos and share our insights about Chinese culture and what is accelerating in trends in China to the world. And this is the very first time we have a chance to talk about the whole new topic, which is the China and US relationship on a national level and socioeconomic level. So as all of us can know that the bilateral relationship and tensions between China and the US appear to have reached an all-time high since two countries established the foreign relationships. In the past months, the major superpowers has been locked in an ongoing trade war, military frictions in the China Sea, and also ironically, they have been blamed each other for causing the COVID-19 pandemic. And we can also see in the past weeks, the situation escalated to the point that Washington, D.C. handed the Chinese consulate in Houston 72 hours notice to close down, accusing for spying on America. And on retaliation, Beijing made U.S. consulate in Chengdu lower its flag and leave. Has the relationship hit the lowest in the diplomatic history, and can the situation actually get worse? We've been hearing and listening to different voices from politicians, scholars, economists, policymakers, entrepreneurs, and business analysts worldwide. And I have to admit that there hasn't been any constructive answer and mutual agreement on this matter. But what about the public view and the social view on this level, both for American people and Chinese people? What about the global-minded citizens from both countries making their influences to the majority of the population? Are they sharing the same common value with their own incapable politicians and leaders? What are the views from the insiders who are deep connections with another country and who are actually having a unique perspective on China and US relationships? So join me today are two tremendous China insiders. We can see that they're both Americans who live in China in the past decades with solid China experience and are constantly keeping their interest on various topics between these two countries. And they're not only deep thinkers, but also distinguish themselves as the bridge to smooth the tensions between our two countries. So ladies and gentlemen, please, to join me, welcome Mr. Thomas Rippe and Cyrus Youngson. Hello, guys.
Hey, everybody.
Hello, Cyrus from Vancouver. Sorry, there's a connection issues with Cyrus. It's okay, Cyrus.
Hey
now?
guys, can you hear me now?
Lovely.
There we go.
Yeah, lovely.
Yes, we can.
Great.
Sorry, yeah, sorry. Hi everybody, welcome. I'm coming in live from Vancouver, Canada. It's a pleasure to be here. Chen, thank you so much for having me on the show. Tom, it's great to meet you as well, and I look forward to very interesting chat tonight.
Great. So we're actually tuning in and discussing from three different cities. I'm based in Beijing, China. Tom is based in Hong Kong, and Cyrus is calling from Vancouver. So Tom is a very old friend of mine, and we met in Beijing around 10 years ago. It's been a decade. He's currently based in Hong Kong at the moment, and he was a very famous radio host back then in Beijing, and often participated in my jazz music concert to have a good time. That's how we know each other. And I remember we always discussed about what was going on and what was accelerating in trend in both of our countries back then. So Tom, could you please introduce yourself to our audience, and what's your background and what made you decided to first came to China?
So my first time in China was a long time ago. I came to China in 1995. It was my first job after university. And I was just looking for a change. I hadn't before that had any real idea that I was ever going to be in China. And I just randomly found an opportunity to teach English at Nankai University, which is in Tianjin. At the time, it was a 2-hour train ride from Beijing. Now it's about a 30-minute train ride from Beijing. Things have developed a lot. Back in 1995, things were very different. China was at the time still very undeveloped. A lot of people still wore the old blue worker uniforms from the Mao period. A lot of people were still on bicycles. There were very few private cars. Teaching where I was teaching at Nankai University, which is, I mean, it's still considered, I think, a top 10 university or a top 5 university. It's one of the better universities in the country. But in my classroom, I only had electricity probably 3 or 4 days a week. There was always at least one day a week where they just would turn off the electricity. Finding chalk was a challenge. It was a really different time. You know, now China, everything is very advanced. Everything operates kind of on the same international level that you would expect in Europe or the U.S. or Canada. But back then that was not the case. So that was my first, I was there for 1 year, and that was my first kind of snapshot of China. And then I was back again as a graduate student in 2006, lived for the summer in Hong Kong, but spent some time in Shanghai and Beijing also. And it was a really interesting time to visit Beijing because that was right before the 2008 Olympics, when Beijing was really pushing to become an international standard city. And I don't know why this sticks out in my head, but the thing that does stick out in my head, we had a little tour with our student group, and they were really proud of the number of public toilets that they were renovating. And it was a really specific number. It wasn't like, we're going to renovate about 1,000 toilets. It was like 1,476 public toilets are going to be renovated. But it was that, you know, really deep down, minute level attention to detail kind of rebuilding of the city right before the Olympics. And they were kind of getting into that process at that time. And then back again in 2009 to work at China Radio International, which is where I met Chen. And that was right after the Olympics. I kind of missed the craziness of the actual Olympics. But in that 3 years, the way the city had been just completely ground level rebuilt was astonishing. And then I was in Beijing for 8 years at that time, from 2009 to 2017, back home for a couple of years to kind of pursue an interest in local politics, and then ended up back in Hong Kong just this year. So that's kind of my in and out China background.
Lovely, lovely. Great to have you here, Tom. And let's go to Cyrus. Actually, Cyrus is a very new friend of mine. We actually met online in the last couple of weeks, and through his videos, since I decided to make some live stream sessions to talk about the world issue from a Chinese person's perspective. So I think, well, come on, it's going to be great to talk about these China-US issues with the similar people who are preferably is American, is doing the similar things. So I reached out to Cyrus, and he has been very supportive and accept my invitation to join this panel. First, thank you, Cyrus, very much for joining us. And for those of you who keep following the China topic YouTube videos, Cyrus is one of the best China YouTubers at the moment right now. And I have to say, I'm a big fan of you, man, and of your content, of your videos. Not only because I'm a Chinese person and I support some of your, let's say, pro-China opinions, but I think it's more because I do believe that you're one of the very few people who are actually offering solutions to smooth the tensions, which ironically, both of our politicians and the national leaders should be doing. So, Cyrus, welcome to the program. Please introduce and say hi to our audience, and tell us briefly about what made you decide to first came to China. Take away, Cyrus.
Absolutely. Chen, first of all, it's my honor to be here and my pleasure. Greetings, everybody. So I actually first went to China in 2007. Went and started a career in Shanghai directly after university. And what was interesting is I grew up in America, grew up in Florida. My mother is from Germany. So growing up, you know, I would go summers, spend our summers in Germany and Europe. And I had, you know, an exposure to traveling overseas and abroad. So as I was getting ready to graduate from university, my first thought was, you know, I should try a career overseas. And my background is actually in the golf industry. So actually my first job that brought me to China was actually to be a golf instructor. And so that's what brought me to China right after graduation. That just happened to be an opportunity in Shanghai. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to take it. I'm young. I just graduated university. You know, there's you know, this is the time to kind of take a risk. I ended up going to Shanghai, stayed there for 7 years, working within the golf industry, first as a golf instructor, and then got up the chain into management, then started working, actually had a chance to move to Hong Kong. So I moved to Hong Kong for 3 years, and was working in a sports marketing field, managing with a sports marketing company. And we had clients like HSBC, Mercedes-Benz, and we were doing a lot of corporate events all throughout mainland China. So it was based in Hong Kong, traveling all over China, and in total had 10 years of experience living in China. My wife is Chinese Canadian, so we had an opportunity, to come here to Canada, and we have 3 young children, so we're now raising our kids here in Vancouver. And what's interesting now is I have a marketing company right now where we are actually helping Canadian businesses connect with Chinese consumers, and then also doing some cross-border, consulting, etc., from Canadian and U.S. businesses going back into China. So, but this is a great place to be here in Vancouver. Very large Chinese population, so I feel right at home. It's kind of the best of both worlds for me. Get a bit of the West and East culture here in Vancouver, so it's very lovely. But I have a passion for obviously in my home country of America, and certainly a country that I've spent a lot of time in China. And I have a very simple phrase that I often say on my YouTube channel, is that when China and the United States can work together, the entire world is going to win. And that is something that I'm really preaching. And I feel that our countries have to figure this out. We need to figure out a way to work together, and that's why I'm making these videos, and hopefully playing a very small part in pushing these countries that way. At least changing some people's minds and trying to offer some perspective.
Lovely, lovely. Great to have both of you here. I'm very humbled to invite you here on our program. So it actually reminds me the good old times when our 2 countries used to get along pretty well in the past decades. I remember the economy was good, trading was good, the cooperation were a lot, and there are so many opportunities for Chinese people and for Americans to make international travels to each countries, and more cultural engagement and more social communications. But there's at the moment, some very wonderful memories, because some people are saying that we're already involved and witnessing the second Cold War after the World War II. And I want to ask both of you one question. Would you guys agree that this is the lowest and worst U.S.-China relationships have been to date, or you guys think it can get even worse in the future? Tom, let's go ahead.
I think the first part of that question is, are we in a new Cold War? And I would say not yet. I'm older than you guys. You can see the white in my chin here. I remember the first Cold War. I grew up in the 1980s, and I remember the bad relations with the Soviet Union. And there were no relations with the Soviet Union. There was no economic exchange at all. It was just really just a military rivalry. There wasn't much of an economic rivalry either. The Soviet Union never pushed the United States economically the way China can. And so that was just bad. There were no positives in that. There was no relationship. So you can't say there were positives. It was just all negative. There is still a lot of economic exchange between the United States and China. There's talk of decoupling, but to actually do that, the way that the international supply chains are tied together now is going to be a really long and difficult process. And a lot of companies are going to resist that process. A lot of people are going to resist that process. And so fortunately, I think it's a good thing that China and the US for now are still really tied together in ways, whether they like it or not, they have to find ways to cooperate. This idea of decoupling then becomes kind of dangerous, I think, because if you have full decoupling where the 2 countries don't have those economic relationships, they'd have less incentive to cooperate. So I think that's something to kind of keep an eye on. This interconnecting of globalized supply chains is something that keeps us from having World War III. Not the only thing, but I think it's important. The more dependent we are on each other economically, the less likely we are to start shooting at each other. As far as the relations and the way relations go, I think, yeah, it's gotten bad. I think the political situation in both countries, times are more stressful now than they were maybe 10 years ago. And all countries, and I think China and the US in particular, they're really big countries, and they have the luxury of being able to get very inward looking when times are difficult like they are now, in ways that smaller countries can't. And they tend to kind of turn in on themselves, and both countries are doing that right now. And I think that's causing some of this decoupling talk and some of this trouble. Ideally, things calm down and they start looking for ways to connect again. I think it could get better, but it definitely could get worse. it kind of depends on which way things go. But if the countries are feeling confident, and if everybody's feeling good about the world, they'll be more likely to cooperate. When they feel scared and threatened is when they start to look inward and become more xenophobic and less cooperative.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Tom. So let's go to Cyrus. The same question I want to ask you. Do you agree that this is at the moment the lowest and the worst U.S.-China relationship, or you think it might get even worse in the future?
Yeah, Chen, thank you. So first of all, Tom really hit on some great points there. And, I think I have to say, yes, I do think that this is probably the lowest the United States and China's relationship has been. I mean, when we look at, Nixon going to China in 1972, that was obviously, really the formal start of the China-U.S. relations. And at that point, it was really, trying to help China open up, teaching them some capitalistic ways. Obviously, the United States came in and, throughout the 80s and 90s, that's when the first companies were starting to invest into China. And I think, basically what I feel is, both the United States and China have gained tremendously from this relationship for many years. Obviously, the United States has gained tremendously in the sense that they can, manufacture so many of these products. And like Tom had said, you look at how our two economies and how the global supply chain is currently organized, they're so interconnected. It's not as simple as saying, we're going to ban TikTok and they've got to leave. I mean, there's just so many different layers that is very complicated to just remove. And it's almost really impossible because like he had said, like Tom said, there's going to be companies, many companies that have invested, millions and tens of hundreds of millions of dollars into China, to build this infrastructure. And for instance, the United States has gained tremendously, because they've been able to manufacture their products for a better price in China, then import them in for higher profits into America. But not only that, but in the last couple of decades specifically, they've been able to then re-import them back into China and sell them to a consumer base that is growing, and that grew from that relationship with that started with Richard Nixon and growing. So I think when we look at the entire 50-year history between these two countries, I think this is certainly a low point, and what I'm really interested to see is how this will happen really in the next 2 months, as we get to this American election. I think that I think there's going to be a very different tune that's going to be presented, let's say starting November 4th, and probably into 2021. I do think that the countries are going to have to realize, we cannot go down this path of starting a war. And, we've had a tremendous 2020 in many ways. And I think you're going to possibly see, potentially the next 2 months, it could get worse. But I think in 2021, I'm very optimistic. I mean, that, we have to sort this out, and I think that we will.
Thank you so much, Cyrus. So I think like everybody, we've been seeing so much blaming to the Chinese Communist regime, not only from the Western media, but from a lot of other countries after the outbreak of the COVID-19. And many people are saying that it is a communist virus, it's the CCP who made it happen on purpose or stuff like that. So, and I think there is a profound mistrust and disagreement on two I'll say different ideologies, which I think first is the U.S. form of liberal democracy, and the second of the ideology I think is the CCP form of China. So it seems like these two systems are also provoking to each other in the particular era at the moment. So talking about ideologies is a very broad scale topic, but I want to break down and I want to ask Cyrus a question. How is your view on some of the deeper issues behind these two ideologies? What do you think of China's regime of CCP, first when you came to China or after a couple of years when you live in China? Do you think there are any advantages of this regime, or is all negative according to the Western media? And what are the things you think these two systems most people do not know about, Cyrus?
Yeah, great question, Chen. I think there's an interesting thing, growing up in America, it's a very simple formula on America's view towards communism. It goes like this: communism equals evil. China is communist. China therefore is evil, or the regime is evil. Anything to do with communist has a very negative connotation. Now we know in China, people don't even really call it communism. It's more socialism with Chinese characteristics, is the way that they say it. Of course, it is a communist country, but we know that in many ways, they're a very capitalistic, obviously embracing, entrepreneurship and ability to really open up. I think really, for a lot of people, they just don't really understand how the Communist Party works. They don't understand the fact that there's 90 million Chinese citizens that are a member of the Communist Party, the fact that there are local elections that happen, and that it's a very complicated system based on meritocracy in order to rise up these ranks. And it's interesting. I made a video specifically about this on my YouTube channel last week, where I was talking about our two systems, the democracy and the China's one-party state. I think there's advantages to both systems, and my key message in that was saying, that both systems have been very successful. And so, over these last, obviously America has achieved tremendous success with their democracy, but what China's done the last 30 years with the one-party state has also been very successful. I think kind of the best way that I would describe it, I'm going to take this from Eric Lee, a fantastic speaker that really breaks down China a lot, and he said that, in China, you cannot change the party, but you can change the policy. And in America, you can change the party, but it's very difficult to change policy. And so, we kind of see this always in America. Again, we're coming up on an election. We're 2 months away from another election. We have, the nation's being torn apart. And this is really one of China's greatest political strength, is the fact that every 4 years, they're not subject to this cycle of just tearing each other apart. Every 5 years, the government releases, a new 5-year plan. They have a very concentrated effort because every year, they don't have to go through this. Well, we have an election year this year. We know it's going to be difficult. The United States government, how can they really move forward in 2020 at this year? Because the current president is completely focused on getting reelected. His opponent is completely focused on getting into the White House. It's very difficult for the United States to move forward. So, again, I'm not anti-democracy. I think that, again, there's advantages to both systems, but I think a lot of people don't understand, that the Chinese government is actually very, it's not like North Korea. People think it's this dictatorship that only sees that goes. And I would say, Xi Jinping has a much different, style, the way that he does. He's throughout his career, when he was in Fujian for 17 years, from 1985 to 2002, he had a very big reputation for being very straightforward on corruption. He did have almost a zero tolerance policy on that. That was really part of his legacy throughout his entire political career. We saw that immediately in 2013, when he started really launching that campaign, and it was just a bit more extreme, than his predecessors. So that's where people are saying, look, it's this regime and it's really, authoritative. He's doing it a little bit different style than other presidents before in China. However, the Chinese Communist Party is continuing to, change and evolve and look at new things and trying to see how they need to pivot and move forward in the future.
Very interesting point. Talking about this issue, I want to share something about, Chinese people, our opinion about U.S. liberal democracy. I think, we actually, in the past decades, the majority of the Chinese population from my generation, I was born in the post-80 generation, we actually have a lot of admiration about the U.S. Type of democracy. I think we do acknowledge there are some really, solid advantages I want to share with two of you and also our audience. I think, one of the things is we think two parties promote, you have the Democratic and you have the Republican. So the rivalry actually promotes more competitions, which I think is the very good idea, because this can be the driving force of the to make the politicians to fight to work more and to fight more for serve the people better and better in the future. So I think this is a very healthy competition in our Chinese people's opinion. And also I think another advantage is the it's more frequent changes and transition between the government. So maximum you have like 8 years there will be a transition of the government. So it actually promotes like equality. So each side can have a chance to get elected. And another thing I would say is more transparency, because more people from the public are getting involved, or I'll say more people from the from different level can get involved. Yeah, so I think there are some really good advantages, of the democracy. But also, I think I've been talking sometimes to the also the Chinese people from my generation or from other generations. They've been also saying some. We have some common values and common opinions on the disadvantages of the U.S. type of democracy. First, we can see, as everybody can view, that I think two parties are fighting at the moment too extremely now. So it's been like very divided. And also, I think, for some people in America, in Chinese people's opinion, not all of them are fully aware of the scenarios of the geopolitical situation before they vote. So I think, people are empowered for sure. Everybody can have a chance to vote for the president in the United States. But I think for some people, they didn't. I mean, for sure they choose what they believe to be the leader of the country. But sometimes it's kind of not very smart, or I'll say it's not a very in-depth choice. So I think in this case, the leader might not be the best option for the country, but maybe on the individual level, they choose what they believe. And also, I think one of another disadvantages Chinese people think about U.S. democracy is really a lot of people are involved into the campaign and into the election. People are, I mean, if in China, for sure, government will put this amount of money in terms of infrastructure or global trading or certain type of other project. But I think in America, Chinese people are saying that, wow, there's a tremendous amount of money are putting into the election and making campaigns. So what a waste of money. So that's,
Right.
I'm just sharing with you what Chinese people, I won't say I represent Chinese people, but I mean, I've been talking all the time to my friends around. So that's what their opinion about. There's some good things and bad things we think about the U.S. Liberal democracy. So talking about the Chinese Communist Party, and many people are saying that also the Chinese system is anti-democracy, or I'll say some people are blaming China for not being democratic. And I want to ask Thomas a question. Tom, what is your idea? What do you think about this issue? Is anti-democracy equal to nationalistic, or I'll say autocratic actions? Tom, what do you think?
I think there's something interesting happening between. Is our audio okay? I'm getting some weird feedback. You guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. There's something that's interesting. I think I'm going to take a little bit of a roundabout way to answer your question. I think China and the US are in a lot of ways more alike than either of them realize, and maybe more alike than either of them would be comfortable with. I think there are people in both countries that favor a more authoritarian approach to things. They like that kind of law and order stuff that you hear a lot in the US and the anti-corruption stuff in China, and they want to kind of clamp down on certain things. And you have other people who are more open, more cosmopolitan, who want more relationships with other countries, who aren't uncomfortable at interactions with foreigners and want a more open system with more civil rights and more freedoms. And I think that dynamic plays out in both countries, just in very different ways because of the different cultures, different histories, different political situations. And so I think that there are people in the U.S. and the people in the U.S. that to my mind are kind of anti-democratic at this point would be kind of offended if I were to call them that. And then you've got, I think, again, people in China who want a more open system, and you've got people in China who don't want a more open system. I think both countries have that. And that dynamic you see playing out around the world too. I think you see it happening in the UK, for example, with the Brexit stuff, where some people want to close down and become more insulated, and do want a more kind of authoritarian approach to things, a more law and order approach to things. So it's not just China and the US, it's happening in a lot of places. And I think this goes back to the earlier points I was making about people feel threatened now. It's a very uncertain time. You've got global issues like, the migration of people all over the place that's being pushed by wars in various parts of the world, by climate change, now by COVID. There's just a lot of reasons for people to feel uncertain, and in those uncertain times, they turn to certainty. And anybody that can come along and promise them, I'm going to deliver this certainty that you crave, I'm going to make you feel safe. People respond to that, and I think that's happening in China, in the US, and in a lot of other countries as well.
I see. Very interesting insight from Tom. Thank you very much. So I think it seems like, talking about regarding the coronavirus strategies worldwide, it seems like U.S. is not interested, or as I'll say, the Trump's administration is not very interested at the moment in even attempt to show leadership on this matter to fight against the virus. And China also, I think, sees that and exploit that. And so the thing is like, I want to also ask you, both of you, a question is, you think does the world at the moment need a leadership, either US or China, maybe another country, or what we need at the moment right now, you guys prefer like a joint coordination, or it's like there must be a leader? It's better to have a leader to lead other countries to show the leadership. Cyrus, what do you think about it? Sorry, Cyrus, you're muted.
Sorry, Chen. You're talking specifically for COVID?
Yeah, for COVID. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, it's really difficult because I believe that China, really showed a very effective way of handling the virus. Now, the problem is that there's a huge cultural difference between obviously China and the United States. I mean, I actually feel United States was kind of destined to be the worldwide leader in COVID because we have this freedom. I mean, we have the freedom. I mean, it's just culturally, there's a huge difference between the Chinese and Westerners as far as in relation to COVID. For instance, I'll give you an example. Here in Vancouver, we had, China, we have a tremendous Chinese population here. As soon as the outbreak happened in Wuhan, people were already starting to, stay indoors here. They were starting to wear masks. And, at that point, I remember thinking like, wow, it's a little extreme. I mean, to kind of, we're in Vancouver, and they're like, no, it's coming. Like it's definitely going to come. Like we need to prepare for this. And we had people pulling kids out of school, and still to this day, I mean, this is almost September now. There are certain Chinese families that they have not, they still really haven't left the house. They go out maybe for a walk, or they get some groceries, but they're not doing what other Westerners here, or even in Canada or the US, as going out to restaurants and kind of resuming life as normal. So they're much more respective, I can say, and you could even say they're a little bit more scared of it, than Americans. So I think it's a difficult situation. That is why for instance, China can lock down. China can shut down the entire country because of a virus. Chinese people are going to respect that. You're not going to have Chinese people going into the streets. I want my freedom. I want this. I mean, obviously they can't do that, right? I mean, they're not allowed to. But culturally, if they had the choice, they wouldn't do that either. And so I think that's the issue that we're seeing with the U.S. And I think it's difficult. I don't think that you can have a worldwide leader because every country is different. You look at Sweden, they chose to do it a very specific way. You have. Yeah, I mean, even for instance, local, schools in our district, they're choosing their ways of, how to handle a reopening. So, I mean, if it's so much down to the local level, I think it's really hard, to see. I mean, I think China really was a big leader, understanding, saying, look, this is what's happening. This is how we're dealing with it. We are doing a lockdown. I mean, I know that Jack Ma and Alibaba, I mean, they started an online basically a forum where they connected doctors around the world to say, look, let's all contribute to this online forum. Let's all work together. I mean, obviously, Jack Ma, an amazing entrepreneur, but a philanthropist. I mean, amazing philanthropist, sending masks and medical equipment around the world. But I love his initiative in early March to build this online forum specifically for COVID to connect doctors around the world. So I think China has done those steps. But I think also, honestly, Donald Trump's done a terrible job, an absolutely horrific job managing this COVID crisis. And it's as simple as this: wear a mask early. I mean, if Donald Trump has a tremendous following in America, very loyal supporters, I honestly think it would have made a difference if he would have, swallowed his pride and actually wore a mask as early as March. I mean, it wasn't until a few weeks ago that he wore the mask for the first time. And so, that I think, America's, is getting through this. They're starting to reopen the economy. I think at this point, I think it's tough to have one leader. I think you're just going to have to press forward. Each country's going to have to do what they're going to do, and we're going to just have to kind of move on with life. I mean, that's our only option right now.
Exactly. Tom, what do you think about this? You think the world at the moment need a leader to lead other countries to get through and get over the pandemic, or we need more like I would say global joint coordination? What do you think?
I mean, I think in the best of all possible worlds, you would have seen the U.S. and China come together right at the beginning. You would have seen leadership from the WHO and other international organizations, and a global response where you could plan, figure out what materials need to produce. We need more PPE. We need ventilators. Try to mobilize it and get it to the right places. And you saw some of that at a lower down grassroots level, but at the top level, it was just not there. I think early on, you saw, for example, in China, the fact that people like Li Wenliang were silenced, that's a problem in the Chinese system. In the US response that Cyrus was talking about, and it also gets into things that you were saying, Chen, about the polarization in the US and the way the two parties just can't come together and get things done. So neither of those countries, because of some of the problems in their respective systems, neither one has been able to really lead. And so there's a weird situation in the world now where it's countries like New Zealand, which has a population of, I think, about 5 million, that are the ones showing leadership. And then other things that have happened, like here in Hong Kong, one of the things that was fascinating to me is it was the public leading the government. The government initially came out and said, don't wear masks because we're going to run out of them and we need to save them for health professionals. And I got here right at the end of January, right at the end of the Chinese New Year holiday. And that was when people were coming back into Hong Kong from China, coming back from visiting their families. And that was when the virus was first starting. And there were lines around the pharmacies like 2 blocks long waiting for masks. And even though the government said, don't wear masks, all the people here said, we've been through this with SARS in 2003. We know how this works, and we're just going to do it ourselves. Yeah. And so it was the public that was pushing the government to do the right thing. But you're really seeing an absence in a lot of places of real solid leadership in this crisis. And so then, yeah, like New Zealand has gotten a lot of credit for what they've done. Taiwan has gotten credit for what they've done. Germany, Angela Merkel has gotten some credit. But it's been, bits and pieces here and there and not coming together on a global scale. And I think here you see the danger of what happens when countries like the US and China can't come together, when instead of trying to cooperate and try to solve the problem, they just point fingers and blame each other. That's a real, and that's going to continue. This is not the last crisis the world is going to face. As we have more and more people on this planet, the crises are going to come more often and they're going to get worse. And if we can't all come together in some way to try to solve these things, we got real problems. I mean, things are going to get bad. It's going to be a rough century if we can't figure this stuff out.
Good point.
Yeah, because here in China, I've been speaking to different Chinese people about this issue. I think a lot of Chinese people, they're thinking, now it's like, it's better for everybody from around the world to find more chances to sit down and talk to each other. Who is willing to cooperate? Let's say, who is willing to cooperate more with each other? Who is not? Let's say first on the health issues and the cultural issues, or let's say media report issues, economic issues, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's the only solution from the Chinese people. We should first sit down and talk, even virtually, but that's going to be the only possibility at the moment. And also, I think, for China and the United States and these countries should find more chance, in Chinese people's opinion, to sit down maybe with some other countries, if they're not feeling comfortable to be face-to-face with each other. Maybe we can invite some other countries to find a chance to sit together and have a chance to keep the dialogue. And because we believe that, you will see some surprising coalitions after you sit down with some other parties, which these coalitions is not because of fear, but it's more because of, we can discuss on how to rebuild a new position, and maybe, let's say, a rivalry position, or let's say a kind of a competitive positions for each countries, but not about, this. At the moment, what we can see is like this negative nationalism, I would say. So it's something about, or I'll say the ugly populism, or it's like an ugly nationalism. So which makes us Chinese people kind of worried and anxious about it. So, and you've also seen some in this regard, some speeches, for example, from Mike Pompeo, I think a couple of weeks ago. He was saying that it doesn't work for the bilateral talks ever since President Nixon's China visit. So he thinks there's no point, and there's no, it's not effective since the past 40 years. U.S. been talking with China, and U.S. found it not effective in terms of communicating with China, and also trading and making a bilateral relationship with China. So he thinks it's not worth it. So I want to ask Cyrus a question. So what is actually the opinions from Americans' public point according to this regard, and how you think the U.S. and China relation at this moment, is that similar American people all believe in what Mike Pompeo are saying?
Yeah, great question, Chen. I mean, I think I addressed this earlier in a YouTube video where I would talked about the truth about Michael Pompeo in China, and I opened that video with a statement saying a very bold statement saying that every time Michael Pompeo opens his mouth, the Chinese people love their country even more. And I think it's and my point with that, when the reason I said that is the fact that a lot of the things that Michael Pompeo is saying specifically about China, I mean, frankly, they're just not true. And I mean, he's saying, Chinese people are desperate to leave China. They're wanting to come to America to seek a better life. Yes, there's certainly Chinese people that love to immigrate to America, but it's not because they don't like China. They have business in China, but they want to, they want to be an expat. They want to, be educated in the West. I mean, obviously, America has an amazing university system. They want to have, these opportunities to go there. Just like, like Tom and myself, we had an opportunity to go to China, in our careers. It doesn't make us, love our country any less or be scared of it. It's just the fact that that's how the world is working. I think, I mean, to be honest, though, when you talk to most Americans, they don't have a very in-depth knowledge of China. And I believe that most Americans fear China. And let's say if they fear China, if an American fears China, the real basis for that is the fact that they just don't understand China. I mean, if you take the average American and you ask them about Chinese culture or Chinese anything, they're not going to know anything about that. And again, that's nothing, to say that America is doing a bad job. I mean, that's just how it is. However, if you do the opposite, if you talk to the average Chinese person, they're going to know a lot more about America. Obviously, in China, everyone's starting to learn English at a very young age, especially this generation, the last 20 years, young students in China are all learning English. They have the American culture. They're wanting to watch Western movies. They're, seeing all of these Western brands like Starbucks and Nike and McDonald's and Apple, all of these things in China. So again, the average Chinese is going to know a lot more about America than the other way around. So I do think that, yes, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to believe Pompeo, his speech, saying that China is the greatest threat to the world. China is going to destroy America. I mean, China's all of these statements that he likes to make. And I think that's why I'm really trying to give some perspective on my channel. I think China, for example, I've never seen China go into another country and say, you should embrace communism. This is the way of the future. China is a very inwardly focused country. I always said, and I said, China is not anti-democracy in America. They're just anti-democracy in China. Do not come into our country and tell us what we should do for our country. So if you cross that line, that's where China is going to get aggressive. But I don't see China going to Korea saying, hey, you know what, you guys should try communism. It's been working out good for us. What do you think about that? No, I mean, Korea, you're fine. You do what you want to do. Again, they're just a very inwardly focused. But when you see, for instance, the situation in Hong Kong, for example, obviously, there was a tremendous amount of foreign interference going on in Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a city in China. It's part of China. That's where they're going to get defensive. China's going to get involved in that. So this is really the reality. So yeah, I do think that a lot of people in China, a lot of Americans, they're not very clear about China. And that is what we're trying to do, is create a channel for people just to understand China a little bit more, because at the end of the day, we have to work with China. Our economies are too connected. These two countries work better when they work together, and we have to find a solution.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Cyrus. I think, I also want to share with both of you, also our audience in the channel. It's like, I think most of the Chinese people, I mean, they're not actually taking what Mike Pompeo's words very seriously. It's more like to laugh about him, and that's it. And also, I think from the Chinese governmental perspective, they're kind of very against and holding a very hostile attitude towards Pompeo. But I mean, for Chinese majority, I mean, for our populations, we don't actually take this person very seriously. So whatever he says, we just laugh about it. It's like a daily joke. So it's more like this. So let's talk about another topic. I think. Let's talk about the elections, and I think we're less than 3 months away. I know it's a very painful topic for both of you. I'm sorry. We're less than 3 months away from the U.S. presidential election. So where Donald Trump will be going head to head, have a fight and have a debate, maybe virtually with Joe Biden. So I think both two were officially nominated as the candidate for their parties of the race in the last past week. And I watched some video clips of the Democratic National Convention, and also yesterday I remember I watched one clip of the Donald Trump speech on the Republican National Convention. So it seems like they've been pushing all their policies and on their issues, and they've been also blaming another party for not handling the things correctly, or it's like not being tough to China or whatever. But I think there is a bipartisan issue, which is China. I think both parties, in my opinion, they're quite against China, and they want to be, whoever is elected, they want to be tougher on China. So, which they claim they have weakened the trust among their allies around the world because of China's, mishandling of the COVID-19 or some other issues. And now I have a question to actually to Tom. Tom, what do you think? Let's say if Joe Biden is elected, how do you think Biden's administration in the future, if he's elected, can change Donald Trump's American First policy, and how Biden will set the tone for, let's say, the U.S. new foreign policy, or let's say China policy? Tom, what do you think? It will be a continuity, or it will be like a new style from Biden?
I don't think it's going to be, it certainly won't be a continuation of what Trump has done, but I don't think it's going to be a really new style either. Some interesting things have been written about his foreign policy goals, and you can tell he's already started putting his team together, which is normal for a candidate at this time. They have to be starting to get ready, and they have foreign policy advisors that help them prepare for the debates, for example. And the people that he's brought in are people that have been around for a long time, and it's pretty clear that what he wants is not new, not a continuation of Trump, but a return to Obama era policy. Biden, you mean he's going to be the oldest, if he's elected, he'd end up being the oldest president ever. He's been in Washington for, I think, 47 years. And so he's going to want a return to what he knows, to what he's comfortable with, which is the China policy that we've seen for the last few decades. He is, however, going to be pushed. The American public now, as you were saying, Chen, is definitely more anti-China than it has been. There are real concerns about some of the competition between the two countries. Some of the intellectual property rights it remains a major issue. The fact that, for example, a lot of American financial institutions are not allowed to operate in China. Communications companies like Google and Microsoft does operate, but they're limited. Google just doesn't operate. And so American businesses see that there's a lot of opportunity in China that they're being locked out of by government action. And so it's not just the public, but it's various business sectors also that are seeing that they feel like there's not a level playing field between the two countries. And that's why you start to see now pushback. This was a new thing, Huawei first, and now with ByteDance, with WeChat. This is the first beginnings of some pushback where the United States is starting to restrict Chinese businesses the same way that China has been restricting US businesses. And Biden is not going to be able to reverse that. And I don't know that he's going to want to. I think the business sentiment in the US is less excited about China than it used to be. They're more willing to look at alternatives. They can manufacture cheaply other places. Wages have gone up in China, which is great for China, but that means that the cost savings of manufacturing in China are not what they used to be, which is why China itself has recognized that and is trying to push for higher end manufacturing. They want to go higher value because they know that low value manufacturing that they've been doing isn't sustainable long term. And so, I don't know that. Again, like I think Biden is going to be less combative and less confrontational than Trump. And he's going to be more interested in building coalitions than Trump is. Trump doesn't really like to play with others. He wants to just do his own thing. Biden is going to be more willing to work with allies. But I don't know that, I know Cyrus is going to disagree with me on this because he thinks there's going to be a big change after the election. I don't, just because again, the public sentiment and also the business sentiment, I think is moving away from that. And the politicians to some degree still have to respond to where the public sentiment is. So Biden will change a bit, but I think it's not going to be a massive turnaround. It'll be a difference in tone maybe, but not as much of a difference in substance as I think some people are looking for.
Very interesting insight. Before going to Cyrus, I want to share some of my personal view about Joe Biden, because also I've been analyzing some of his policies and reading some of his speeches, and I've been following him since the Obama's administration. So I think actually for this person, I think he will be more constructive towards, let's say, China or let's say U.S. allies countries when he's elected. I think personally, I don't believe he will host a very hostile China policy when he's elected, because I think I've been also one of my hobbies is to reading autobiographies and analyzing politicians. I believe that style really matters in foreign relationships. It's not like the content and of your speech, but it's like how you approach to the different politicians, or I'll say different world leaders. I think Biden has this style, and I think he has the charisma maybe to have a chance to really sit down with President Xi to talk about, come on, let's restart a negotiation with China and US about trading, about geopolitical issues, about, let's say, intellectual property rights and some other topics. So I think he has the charisma to form his style in terms of talking with China leaders. And rather than now, I think now it's more like a shouting match on both sides. China is shouting at US, US is shouting back to China. It's more like this, and this kind of the shouting game, I personally think it will not lead us to anywhere. So I think the same content with different approaches, maybe Biden can, let's say, create a little bit new optimism between our two countries. Cyrus, what do you think about that? You think Biden can set up a new tone, or it's going to be a new style, or I think you think it will be like a kind of continuity of Trump's?
It's definitely going to be different. I mean, I think Biden's style is certainly different than Donald Trump. I mean, I like a lot of the things that Tom said, and again, like to that point of I brought up earlier about my thoughts about the election and post-election. I mean, that is a theory that I'm kind of exploring right now, and certainly something that I'm hoping could be true. I don't know. I don't want. I mean, I think honestly, I think Donald Trump is certainly the favorite to win the White House. I think that Biden is the underdog. So I think very realistically that that we're going to have a little bit more of this hardline stance, this Donald Trump stance moving forward. But at the end of the day, my kind of thing is I feel that that Trump is a businessman. At the end of the day, he's going to have to realize that these two countries and our economies are too connected. Going back to the Biden question, I think I mean, again, he's that career politician. Like Tom had said, 47 years in Washington. I mean, he's going to resort back to those, kind of these principles that he's used to. He wants to appoint people that are similar to him, have that great resume, that have been in Washington. And I think a pivot back to say something like the Obama policy towards China, would certainly be a better thing. I mean, it would certainly be a refresher and I think that's kind of where a lot of people, if you're not supporting Trump, for example, and you're wanting to get Biden in there, it's just more, Biden's not a very great candidate either, but it's almost like, well, let's just kind of let's kind of pivot from where we're going. And he's not ideal, but it's at least a little bit better. Like you kind of know when you get Joe Biden in the office, I mean, he's going to be that career politician that many, United States presidents are. So, that's, you kind of know what you're going to get. Donald, obviously, you have no idea what's going to happen. There is an excitement there. That's why he got elected. I mean, he was elected because he's very entertaining. He's very different. And that's what got him into the White House. We'll see if he can, still get elected again. But yeah, I think, I mean, I am hopeful that no matter who wins, that they are going to have to re-examine, this. But, the points that we brought up as well, there's been a series of moves. I mean, for instance, getting rid of the consulate in Houston and then Chengdu. I mean, that's a really big deal. I mean, to just make those shut down. I mean, that's, there's, some people have said, maybe the damage is too big to repair, because they've just been, doing this tit for tat, fighting back and forth, but, we'll have to see. I am hopeful again, that we can have better relations with China starting in 2021.
Exactly. Thank you so much for your insights, Cyrus. I think that's what our both citizens are really wishing to. We can have a better relationship. I think talking about the global images of America and China after the COVID-19 pandemic, or I'll say it's some kind of, let's say, to a certain extent, it's like a disgust of the U.S. and China. So global image are as large as it has never been before during the pandemic. So we've seen like a copy and paste, the blame game, shouting game, and now it's more like a ignore game. Nobody is really caring about each other, it seems like. And I found some very interesting quotation I want to share with everybody. It's like some scholars are saying that America is a young country with around 200 years history, which no change is impossible. And on the other hand, China is an old country. Nothing can be changed there. And another saying is that America is an open society with a closed mind. And China, on the other hand, is a closed society with an open mind. So anyway, decisions are being made by our politicians, which has nothing to do with our individuals. And the two countries are absolutely having the different approaches on our future development. But I think for us, as the enthusiast individuals who are having, like you guys, having deep connection with China, or I have some connection also with America, we all wish and we all want the situation to be more, I would say, smooth or better. So my next question to both of you is like, what do you think we can do as an individual? As for example, for me as an individual Chinese, or for you like an individual American, what can we do as an individual to help our countries and the citizens to better understand each other? And can we coexist with each other under these two systems, or I'll say ideologies? And in terms of finding a way to rebuild our globe image, or is there any chance for the cultural and social renaissance of our global image of both America and China after the COVID-19? Let's start with Tom.
Big question. As individuals, it's hard. You know, the big ideological stuff that you're talking about between the two different systems, we don't have a whole lot of control over that. We can have discussions with our friends and get on social media and be a small part of a broader public conversation that sometimes, I think even in China, I think people underestimate the extent to which social media conversations that happen in China do have some influence over the government. And in the US, maybe you almost have a problem if there's so much social media stuff going on that it's caused kind of a breakdown in the information flow, and that's also influencing things. But so you can have some conversations that have an impact, but I think mostly what we do is we talk to each other and we keep the conversations going and we keep these points of contact. We connect like we're doing today with like-minded people and try to share ideas and information. And it's part of the infrastructure that even if right now the two countries are pulling farther apart and the official channels are breaking down, at some point they're going to realize they need each other, and they're going to need people that have been in the habit of holding those conversations to kind of reboot the relationship. So it's just a question of trying to find understanding and trying to talk to people and trying to exchange information and ideas and keep that flow of information going between the two countries. Again, because I remember with the Soviet Union, there was very little flow of information between the two countries, and that really made it difficult. And there's never been, even after the Soviet Union ended, there's never been a real reset in U.S.-Russia relations. It's still problematic. So I think the more of these points of contact you have, you've at least sort of got one foot holding the door open to keep the door from really closing. So I think that's the role that we can play.
Thank you, Tom. Very interesting point of view. Cyrus, what do you think? What do you think as individual, what we can do to help our countries, or I would say to influence our citizens around us to better understand another country and to promote and to really calm down the tensions and promote more prosperities in the future?
Yeah. Great questions. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I want people to realize is, that I think it's our responsibility, for instance, as Americans, we need to we need to know a little bit more about other cultures around the world. But we need to, for example, so many people that are, let's say if you're believing what Michael Pompeo is saying about China, like how many of those people have actually talked to a Chinese person? To connect with your Chinese community, talk to Chinese people, ask them what they think of their government. I think many Chinese people are very supportive of the Communist Party. And again, many, even in your local community, the fact that they're living in America doesn't mean the fact that they've run away from China. It's again, they've come to America because of an opportunity, much like, we've gone to China because of an opportunity. I think the other thing that's just really important is we look at the United States and our history. I mean, we have gone around the world spreading our way of life. That has been, successful and unsuccessful in certain parts of the world. And again, I think it's just, when we look at our own issues that we're really facing right now in America. We have plenty of them. And I think it's just something where I'm really wanting America to focus inwardly, be a little bit more like China in the sense that, China really is focusing inwardly. They're trying to figure out their system. China comes first. And in America, we're just, for instance, we're putting all of this energy in different parts around the world where we have our houses on fire right now. I mean, you look at the amount of social issues and just kind of craziness that's going on in America. We have plenty of stuff for our politicians to be focusing on inward and a lot of resources that they can be, directing towards that. I think it's just impossible. For instance, America is never going to be China. China is never going to be America. We need to basically accept that there are going to be differences. We need to build on the similarities. And yes, I do believe that we can coexist because we have to. There's essentially two roads that we can go down. We're either going to go down a road towards a new Cold War that hasn't started, but we're certainly on that path, or we can pivot back to peace and we can learn to coexist and go back to that relationship that was present, when I first went to China in 2007, where the United States and China had a much better relationship. And I think we have to find that because I believe the entire world depends on that. You cannot have, the United States and China going to war. When that happens, everybody loses. The entire world economy is going to collapse. So, yeah, I do believe that we can coexist, and I think it's something that we all need to work on. And we just need to accept the fact that there's going to be differences.
Thank you so much, Cyrus, for your insights. So let's summarize. Let's talk, keep in touch, and let's coexist. I think that's going to be the future. So at the very end of our program, I would like to pick a couple of questions from our chat room. So let's pick up this one from Miss Samantha Jenkins. She's asking me what are your background areas of expertise. So my name is Chen. I'm currently based in Beijing. I'm working for a documentary a studio. So we're making cultural videos mainly. So if you anybody who is interested, you can check our channel. So we actually make different travel logs, and we introduce and we tell China cultural stories to the rest of the world, and via some interesting point of view. And also we share some of the what we think are the issues who are accelerating in trend. For example, this China life in APP or in QR code, this kind of videos. We actually promote a lot and produce a lot of short videos and also a long video documentary films. So welcome to check our channels. And my background is I was also studying in mainland China, and I got a chance to study also in the United States as a transfer student, and I also work in the U.S. and China relation, economic trading field for a couple of years for Chinese companies and American companies. So in the past years, I've been traveling around the world since I work on the cruise ships. And since I came back from the ship, I start to collect some of the great memories of my own film shooting and collaborating with some other partners to form this studio. So now we're making basically cultural videos, but due to the pandemic, our production has been also stopped for a couple of months. So now we're still figuring out what to do in the future, but I think it will be great to also find a chance, because we have a great platform. We have subscribers and viewers from all around the world, to find a chance to speak with them, and also to invite insiders like Thomas and Cyrus to talk about what we believe it can be beneficial for the human being in the future on the Chinese basis, because it's rarely very hard to find a Chinese voice or a Chinese channel operated by the Chinese individuals online, especially on YouTube and Facebook. So we want to be maybe not the first, but one of them to represent the Chinese voice and to find a chance to create a channel to speak to the rest of the world. So that's my background, and that's what I'm doing. So let's pick up another question. It's very funny. We have a question from Mr. Kumar, and he's directly sending a message, not to the chat room, but to myself. He want to ask Cyrus and Tom the same question. What do you guys miss the most in China? And he want to ask me what I miss the most in the US. So I think I will just deliver the question to two of you. Tom, go ahead. What do you miss the most from mainland China? Since you're living in Hong Kong, I won't say, I mean, there are differences. It will not be a big differences, but what do you miss the most?
You mean like, does this question mean when I'm living in China, what do I miss about the US? Or I'm not sure what I'm supposed to, I've been living in so many different places, I don't know what to miss anymore. When I lived in Beijing,
yeah, the question is like this. For Tom and Cyrus, what do you miss the most in China? I think he means mainland China.
In China. Yeah, but I think I think he means if I'm in China, what did I miss from home? The things I miss whenever I go anywhere, it's always food. I miss the food from the places that I'm not in anymore. I think, yeah, now I would love to be able to walk down the street in Hong Kong and get a nice warm jianbing, which is my favorite go-to snack in Beijing, and I can't get that anymore. When I was in Beijing, I wanted burritos. When I was in Beijing, I wanted burritos and tacos and maple syrup, and I could find them, but it wasn't easy. When I go back in the US, I miss good Chinese food because the stuff, there's a funny thing that happens. So if you get Chinese food in the US, it's, unless you're in a place that's got a big Chinese population, you're not going to get, like in Vancouver, Cyrus, I'm sure you get plenty of authentic Chinese food, but where I'm from, you don't really get it. So you get this funny American style Chinese food, but there's actually a restaurant in Shanghai now where you can get American style Chinese food in China.
I saw that. I saw that.
And Chinese people are fascinated by it. Because they're like, "What is this stuff? This isn't Chinese." But they you know, it's usually it's a lot of sugar. It's a lot sweeter than regular Chinese food. But the Chinese sort of are fascinated by it, and so the customers at that restaurant are not Americans that miss American style Chinese food. It's Chinese people that are trying to figure out what the hell America's done with their food. But the restaurant's been going. It's been going for years. It still exists. But yeah, it always, whatever I miss wherever I go, it's always, if I'm in one place, I want food from another place. My stomach is never happy. I don't get homesick, but my stomach does.
Exactly. I think the same question goes to Cyrus. I mean, I have a lot of Chinese friends, actually. They're living in Vancouver, or I think in the airport area, Richmond, right? A lot of Chinese friends of mine are living there. They said there are little ships, there are Chongqing hot pots, they're like everything over there. But maybe regardless of food, what do you miss the most from China?
I'm a big foodie, so I mean, I love to eat and I love good Chinese food, and I think, you know, what's amazing is you'll hear this from a lot of Chinese people themselves, that probably the best Chinese food in the world is actually here in Richmond or Vancouver, Canada, because there's amazing fresh ingredients, but you have a tremendous population here of Chinese people that cook it in the authentic way. So, you know, everything you want, the great, you know, Chongqing hot pots and, you know, the jianbing and all of this is available, you know, here in Vancouver. So luckily I can get my fixes, you know, when I need the yang rou chuar, you know, I have a place to go and, you know, and get that. So, but I would say probably the thing I miss most about China is just the energy. You know, I think there's a certain energy when you're walking in. Last I was in China was last September. I was on a business trip to Shanghai, and you know, just walking down the streets. I mean, there's a certain energy that is really felt in China, at least for me. You know, when I'm back there, you know, obviously a lot of people around. You know, there's just the hustle and the bustle. Vancouver is a beautiful place. A lot of Chinese people will tell you this is a place to come retire. You know, it's a little too boring for Chinese people. They like the big cities. You know, if you're coming from a big city like Shanghai or Beijing or Guangzhou, I mean, you love the action. And so I love, you know, just the adventure, the excitement, the energy that is in China. Whenever I go back to China, I just have this very high adrenaline rush because I know that, you know, there's just so much excitement going on. And then when I come back to Vancouver, it's this kind of nice little quiet town, you know, almost this sleepy little town on the coast that, again, you know, it's a great place to be. It's a very lovely spot, great Chinese community here. But you know, I do miss China a lot as well.
Thank you, Cyrus. Very, very interesting. I think the same question for me. What I miss the most in the U.S. Well, since I'm a jazz musician as well as one of my hobby, and what I was keep doing since I was, teenager. So, what I miss the
It's
most is
not
the
just
jazz.
a hobby. It's not just a hobby. He's a pro.
Thank you for it's blabbering. I mean, I miss the gigs and I miss watching all the live stream sessions for for Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra for all the jazz gigs because this culture is actually established in America and this is what I made me fascinated about every time I go to the U.S. I for sure every night I will be located in one of the jazz clubs and had a good time over there.
Nice.
So what I miss the most maybe not the food in the U.S. but yeah the culture of jazz music. Yeah, I would say. Okay, let's pick up, I think, the last question. Let's check. It's very interesting. It's from JK. So the question goes like this. Is U.S. ready for Asian centuries? China, Korea, Japan, Singapore, or some others? Who want to answer these questions? Also very funny. It's about the future.
Sorry.
So is the question he wants?
Yeah.
He wants to know if
is the United States ready for the Asian century? Which means maybe the
Asian
centuries of
century.
China. Yeah, Asian century. He means like China, Korea, Japan, Singapore, and more. Yeah.
Cyrus, you want to jump in, or
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll take it. I mean, I think I don't think the U.S. is ready for it, but I think it's coming. I mean, we know obviously, the China's on a pathway to overtake the U.S. as far as the economic powerhouse in the world. And I think not far behind that, in a few more decades, will be India. That could potentially be number 2, bumping the U.S. down to number 3. It's probably going to happen in this century. But I think what I always want to say is I feel that the United States, they're always going to be the world leader, and they're always going to be someone that every country around the world, it does look up to. I mean, you look at the United States presidential election, every country in the world is tuning in for that, right? I mean, this is it's not a U.S. event, it's a global event. I mean, the president of the United States really is the leader of the world in a way. And so I think, even despite, yes, the numbers are going to indicate that China's economy is bigger, but I mean, China and its citizens are still going to look at America. They're still going to want to see, what America is doing. So I think that's where I would talk with a lot of friends, and, I believe that they'd be like, China's trying to come out, they really want to destroy us. They want to take over number 1. That's the huge goal. I think it's just kind of inevitable. I mean, you have 1.4 billion people with a thriving economy that's been growing for 30 years. I mean, it's going to happen. I don't think China sat down and said, look, we want to overtake the U.S. How are we going to sit down and do this? They're thinking, how do we alleviate poverty? How do we improve their cities? How do we improve as a country? And yes, as a result of that, this is going to happen. So I don't know if they're really ready, but I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to really change life in America. I mean, America is going to continue to progress. America is a fantastic country. I mean, we have many amazing companies in America, and again, America is always going to be, really the world leader, in my opinion. So, it's not going to have to be a huge adjustment for Americans.
Thank you so much, Cyrus.
I'll take a.
Yeah, go ahead.
Slightly different look at it. Everybody assumes that all these things are going to happen in the future, but there are some interesting things that happen when you start looking at the demographics. And I saw a demographer, a guy that just studies human population and movement, and he was saying that by the end of this century, the populations of China and the U.S. are probably actually not going to be that different, which is a shocking thing to think now when China's population is 4 or 5 times the size of the U.S. But the Chinese population has peaked and it's already starting to come down. And one of the things that's interesting now is that even with some relaxation in the one-child policy, the rates are still going down. It hasn't really caused the birth rates to go back up again the way policymakers were hoping. So right now, China's at 1.4 billion, but this guy that I saw speak was saying that by the end of the century, it's probably going to drop down to about 800 million. Still a lot of people. Oh. The U.S., the native population of the U.S. is more or less flat, but the U.S. is much more welcoming of immigrants, even though it's become more closed to immigrants lately. But he was saying that he figures by the end of the century, the U.S. population should be up close to 600 million. So right now you have this gap of 1.4 billion to about 360 million. in the U.S., and it's a huge gap in population. But this guy's saying that over the remainder of the century, you get to 800 billion and 600 billion, and it's not a huge gap. And so I don't think we want to take the current demographics for granted. And so that changes the dynamics between the two countries. And so when you really start to think about this Asian century, the centuries are long. You know, we still got 80 years to go in the rest of this century. And the idea that it's inevitable that China is going to pass the US and everything, I think is not as written in stone as some people want to think. India is another interesting case. Its population will be bigger than China's very soon, and they don't have a one-child policy, and so their population is still growing. India is kind of a wild card.
Right.
The question I think mentioned Japan, Korea, Singapore. Those countries already have declining populations, and that Japan has kind of resigned itself to loss of economic influence in the world. They dropped from 2 to 3, and now I think to 4. They're soon dropping behind Germany, or could drop behind Germany. And so their view of the world is really being shaped by their demographics, and demographics are really an important thing to look at when you want to understand the way things are going to go over the next, when you're talking about decades and centuries, not so much when you're talking about what's going to happen next week.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Tom, for your insight. I mean, if this question go for me, I will simply ask, I think either a China, I would say Asian centric or the West centric, we have to sit down, we have to talk with each other, and we have to coexist. That's my answer. So
absolutely.
Thank you everybody so much for your deep insight, and thank you for everybody who tuned in to ask any questions. That was a great opinion sharing session, and it's been a great honor to have both of you, Cyrus and Tom, our program. Thank you all the viewers for tuning in. Please, if you like Cyrus and Tom, check their articles. Tom doesn't have a YouTube channel, but you can search for some of his articles on journals and on newspapers. Cyrus has a YouTube channel, so I post a link of Cyrus' channel on the description, also on the introduction of this video. So welcome to click a like and thumbs up to Cyrus, and also welcome to check our cultural videos on our I'm in China page. To make the live stream, actually it's not my job, but at the moment we're planning to do like a weekly session of these live sessions, talking with different insiders from different countries. So of course, regarding the US and American issues, we'll be more than happy to invite back Cyrus and Tom again. So that'll be based on their availability in the future. So for any inquiries, we have also an online community on the I'm in China base. So whoever want to drop us a question or ask us what do you want to hear about the next session of the live stream, we're more than happy to hear from you and to answer your questions, maybe to make another session of the live stream based on your requests as well. So, well, again, a pleasure to have both of you here, and I wish Tom you're doing well, and I wish Cyrus a very good night in Vancouver, and I hope to meet with you guys very soon in person, and also I'm sure we'll be getting in touch very frequently online. So stay safe, be well, cheers, bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining.